one of the basic ideas that I developed over the 20 years of research was the idea that one should take seriously the teaching that God is a verb and not a noun. That when we're looking at the spiritual world, we're looking at a higher dimensional space, at the transcendent, it's always dynamic in our space. It's not static. Static is dead. So so I decided to look for geometric metaphor, because I think that's a universal language, and we could go into why the Arecibo project and the Jet Propulsion Lab and the ideas of trying to communicate with extraterrestrials look to mathematical forms. And the chief mathematical form everybody wants to look for, by the way, is the number pi, because that is the most interesting and important number in all of science and math. Well, I didn't get to what goes around comes around immediately, so I'm going to start with as above, so below. By the way, there's a website where you can find some of what I'm going to show you and some of the drawings that are going to be there. Can you put the main drawing? Yeah, put the main drawing up. If you think literally, and you think in terms of nouns, as above is the thing, so below is the thing, we'll stack them up. Geometrically, it's like two parallel horizontal lines. One is above and one is below. If you're thinking dynamically, then it's more what goes above is like what goes under. And so I came up with this idea of, instead of making two unit lines, just parallel, of trying to see what would happen if you made a dynamic form. And we're going to find out eventually that this line really is a circle, and the circle is really a sphere as you go through the dimensions. But let's just look at the line. This is one unit, and this is one unit also. So what we're going to get when we make a triangle is not going to be an equilateral triangle. It's going to be an isosceles triangle. These two sides are not units, and what this side is a unit. And when you do that and extend these lines and just put a right angle, it turns out that this is a 3, 4, 5 proportion triangle, because this angle is exactly the same as the angle for the 3, 4, 5 triangle. And if you start here and swing a radius, then this length is related to the golden rule, to the golden mean, I'm sorry, which is a numerical value, which turns out to be a dead end for most of this. But it comes from the golden rule. The source of the golden mean is the golden rule, the source of the 3, 4, 5 triangle. The 3, 4, 5 triangle itself is interesting. People have suggested that the Egyptians knew about it because they had this chord that had 12 divisions. So 3 plus 4 plus 5 adds up to 12. So if you had a knotted chord with a knot at every unit, you could easily make it into, I don't know if I can do, and you could, and later we're going to find out our circle is going to have a 12-fold symmetry, so this 12 is going to end up showing up back in the circle anyway. So that's the basic idea. But we know something from physics. I didn't come upon it this way, but we'll start with Newton. Newton tells the laws of motion and the laws of gravity. Newton tells us that impulse equals momentum. What Newton says is that this is time. If you take a clapper and hit a gong really hard, or have a thunderbolt with a lightning bolt, a thunderclap, you make an impulse. Now, in the ideal case, it's going to take no time at all, and it's going to be infinitely tall. Obviously, that's not a real situation, so any real impulse is going to be finite and have some duration in time. But it turns out that this impulse is transferred when you hit a ball into momentum, and the momentum, I'm not making a scale for this, the momentum continues on forever. So I think it's force times time equals mass times velocity. So what was a short, sharp pulse, an impulse, becomes a low, continued motion that just keeps going. That's the essence of impulse and momentum. Along comes Dirac many years later, and Dirac tells us, well, actually, let's go to a musician first. A musician makes some sort of music, and it goes into a wave analyzer, and he comes out with a spectrum of the notes that are being played. And this is a spectrum analyzer. Formally, what's really going on, the way you do this, the way you get sine wave components by analyzing a musical note, or the way you get an optical spectrum from a beam of white light, is called a Fourier transform. The idea is the mathematical physicist Dirac said that a particle was like an infinite pulse that had absolute location but no duration, no movement at all. And its wave function, if this pulse is infinite, extends over all time from minus infinity time, I don't know how to make infinity time, to plus infinity time at a negligible amplitude. So there's an infinity here with very little amplitude, and there's an infinity of amplitude here with very little breadth. And one is in the time domain and one is in the spatial domain. But we can divide through by infinity. And if we divide through by infinity, what we're going to get is the same triangle, is the same form. This is going to be a unit up, upside down here, and a unit wide. One is the particle and the other is the wave. And they're complements. So you only get one or the other, or some in-between value. So we're finding that this particular triangle is the basis of Newton's impulse and momentum, and it's the basis of particle-wave duality. But it turns out, of course, that this is a flat surface, and these are one-dimensional lines. The wave function is not one-dimensional. It can be in Hilbert space. It can have lots of dimensions. If we're two-dimensional, what most people don't understand, and let me see if I can explain it. This is actually a circle. If this were the origin, and this were +1, and this was -1, it should be a half, but it doesn't really matter, then the radius would be here to here, and the circumference could only be these 2 points, and that's called a one-dimensional circle, a one circle. But we could take it up a dimension. And instead of a one circle, we could have a two circle, which is a circle. Now, what do we have? One, this is now the wave function. The simplest version of it would be understood as a cycle of fifths, a musical cycle, which comes around constantly. And what we have now is the wheel of karma. We have what goes around comes around. And we have as above, so below. We have two different axes. One is circular, and one is linear. Look at Lord and God. God is all-inclusive. Lord is singular. The Lord sits on the top of an infinite pedestal, lording it over the earth plane, which is the domain of all there is. The earth plane in general, the plane of three-dimensional reality.